Hello and welcome to the Great White North, your place for the iciest cold takes from the frozen wastelands of the North. I'm your host, Charles Constantine, and with me is NP. Hey, how's it going, NP?
Very good. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing great, man. Doing great.
We've got a really good show lined up today. We're going to have, I'm excited about my new graphics, first of all. Spent some time on them.
It's fancy stuff.
We've got Owen coming up, taking another crack at an interview with him. And then we got Max Awney, on Country Checkup. We're going to talk about the truckers. We're going to talk about Pierre Poilievre. We're going to talk about, I don't know, whatever else we like.
We'll come up with some new things, but I'm digging this new production, high quality. We're doubling the value every single week, it looks like. So hopefully we can keep up the pace here.
I'm bearish on our quality. Or bullish. I'm not very good with money. I'm whichever one makes me optimistic.
Yeah, I think it's bullish.
I'm bullish on our quality. Take two. Bullish on our quality. I'm leaving that all in. All right. Well, let's talk. I mean, there's only one thing in Canadian news this week, and there's a few things, but they're all related, and it's these truckers.
Yeah. There's lots of news around all that. Just people upset with these COVID things. I think a lot of, I guess you could call it working class resentment against what they feel is government overreach. A lot of antagonism towards this authoritarian, this perception of an authoritarian government. And we're seeing, like, you know what, it's positive in the sense that people are doing something rather than just sitting around and doing nothing. But what are your what's your thoughts over this past week? What have you taken away so far?
I first like to say I'm in full support of them, and I'm impressed at their tenacity, and I think they've handled it very well. I'm worried now, just from the news in the last couple days, that they're gonna try and run a Jan 6 on them and make a bigger thing of it than it actually is, and persecute these guys right to hell. But that doesn't take away one iota. In fact, that makes it even more important what they're trying to fight for. I don't have much more to say than they'd say themselves. I'm wishing them victory.
Yeah, I mean, all the best to them. Here's the breakdown from what I see. So first of all, the whole COVID thing, I think we were on track to be rolling back the mandates at some point or another. I think the biggest mistake our politicians made was waiting and holding off on it when all these other countries started rolling back, when Ireland and the UK,
United States,
when they started rolling back. Yeah, everywhere. They all should have
taken the exit ramp
on board, because they had to admit that the vaccine doesn't stop the spread. The mandates don't actually do what they were supposed to do, because the vaccine wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. And Omicron was just spreading too quickly for them. So Omicron was really a kill shot in that whole COVID narrative that they were running with.
Yeah.
And
I think it was Matt Parrott who said, it's like they're cheering for the sunrise at dawn or whatever. Like, it's probably going to happen anyway. I don't disagree with that in a way. However, they don't know that, and they don't feel that way. So it doesn't take away from their heart in the matter, you know?
Yeah, and that's where I like where their heart is. But just to bring some reality to it, and to talk a little bit about our politicians and their approach to the matter, I think the issue is, really, we have some of the dumbest, most unimpressive neoliberal politicians in the world. I think, imagine missing your opportunity to roll back COVID with an excuse. Like, you have the Omicron excuse, and you could have pointed to all these other countries to roll back this stuff. got it out of the way, and now you have to deal with this trucker uprising, and you're in a catch-22 now because they actually have impeded things and caused issues, whether it's at the Coutts border in Alberta or whether it's gridlock in Ottawa, even gridlock in Toronto now apparently. That those are real issues, and they now that they have to do this whole state of emergency, now it looks like they actually have to apply real force to it because they have a government to run, they have a country to run, and they don't want to look like they're backing down to demands of protesters, especially when they were probably planning to do this already. They were already on track. So in the incompetence of these politicians, they've basically forced themselves into the worst possible situation. And I think it's good because it shows just how illegitimate this way of governing is, because it is not really this liberal freedom approach to things, because there's always going to be a point at which there's a state of exception where you have to apply some force. And it shows some of the hypocrisy in the whole matter, where you can have people, burning cities down and rioting for BLM and have that completely framed as a positive, as a good way to protest. And then this basically peaceful and it might be obstructive, but it's not violent. And yet this is one being framed as an insurrectionist attack and a threat to our sacred democracy, just like January 6th. So it just shows that that all of these narratives that they've built up around the liberal parliamentarian system are false. The issue is that the truckers and the sort of libertarian-minded people don't really see it that way. That's where the issue lies, I think, is when they're having to appeal to these sort of illusions of liberal freedom. And that's the issue, and especially when I'm seeing people latch on to those narratives from our sphere, where they're pulling out bodily autonomy arguments, and we just want freedom to ring and blah blah. Like,
yeah, it's such a tricky one though. Always, how do you get around the freedom rhetoric? Like, we don't want to be the party of. It's always such a tricky issue. I have a hard time when I'm talking to my family and stuff to avoid saying freedom and stuff like this. Because ultimately, our way would give them more freedom in the sense they want, but it's an entirely different thing.
Yeah, well, they have that notion of negative freedom where it's like freedom from restraints, freedom. I mean, really, it's freedom from responsibility in some sense, because they are accepting the same liberal freedom that tells you that you can, castrate yourself, right?
Right.
But it's tough to unravel that when you don't have a coherent counter narrative to it. I think we do. I think it's easy enough to come up with something. I think you can make appeals to duty and to virtue. To like, you have a responsibility to uphold certain virtues, and that's where your rights come from, or that's where your capacity to have some self-actualization or individual autonomy comes from. Not because some governing body arbitrarily says these are the rights that you have, because obviously that's not how that works. If they decide that whatever right it is inconvenient for the governing body, well, then you obviously, like we've just seen, you lose it the moment that it's inconvenient for them. So it's tough to make that shift for them when you don't have narrative control in the matter.
Without a doubt. Speaking of narrative control, we gotta show this tweet you just dug up for us. The liberals are losing their minds trying to frame this all to their advantage.
Look at this thing.
I'll read it out.
Yeah, go for it.
Mary Fernando, MD, which stands for Major Doofus. The Ottawa occupation is being supported by American flag money in an attempt to change the way that Canadian flag manages COVID-19. The American deaths per capita have been far higher than in Canada because of our better public health policies. Why would we want more deaths here?
So yeah, apparently Americans are funding this trucker protest to help cause more deaths in Canada from COVID. Like,
Yeah, that
I
must
mean,
be it.
I'm impressed with the, I guess you could call it chutzpah on this. I mean, you're willing to go to bat for your own side of the narrative so strongly that you'll come up with this level of rhetoric. So good for her on that regard, I guess. But completely insane.
Yeah, just plain bonkers. You love to see it though. God grant me ridiculous enemies, or whatever the saying goes.
Totally agree on that. Totally agree. All right. Well, I think we don't have much more to say on the trucker thing, other than I mean, good luck to them. I
And
guess
maybe we'll talk with Mac about it a bit. He might have
I
some
think
thoughts.
yeah, I think we'll get on that. I guess the only other thing I think is I guess what I don't like is uh, the the lack of ability to acknowledge some of the real issues in terms of, for example, white replacement. Like all these, like if you pay attention to what's happening to the trucking companies across Canada, just all being taken over by Indians, and the white men that traditionally worked in that industry slowly losing. And I even dated a girl whose dad owned a truck driving school that sold those licenses, and that got taken over by Pajit. So it that aspect of things, I think a lot of what's coming for truckers and working class whites in general is uh, is an anxiety that these men do have, but it's not able to be expressed. So um, seeing it expressed only through this COVID resistance um, isn't that great to see either. Like if it would be better if they had the moral confidence to express those aspects of their worries.
Yeah,
Because
that would be
it
really
only comes
cool.
out through COVID.
Yeah, it's sad it has to get this far and be this obvious. Yeah, they've been. Yeah. Um,
I think that's one of those things where someone has to start giving them permission, because obviously they have permission to revolt against COVID, but they don't have permission to revolt against white replacement.
right.
So I think giving like you give people permission to be upset about all things, and we shouldn't double down on the COVID stuff too much, because then all that energy I think might just get funneled into that. So we want to also be aware of um, again what really is being censored, what really is being shot down unanimously. Like it's been this way for years that you haven't been able to talk about the anxiety of the white working class. So just because this has been an outlet for them doesn't mean that we should continue to focus on it as the main goal, because we have to come back to what the real struggle is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everyone's gonna tire of COVID extremely quickly within the next, like, I mean, everyone's already tired of the topic and everything like that, but it'll be even no one's even it'll be even more so in a few weeks. So
Yeah,
so we should
look for ways to redirect that energy to the
like
real.
I'd say we focus on punishing in a way, like making sure that they don't forget that Scott Moe did put in the regulations, even though he pulled them back, for instance.
Yeah, I think it might be useful to say point out where these politicians went behind their backs, or they lied on their promises or whatever, and then bring that over to where else that we have had our back stabbed. Again, in the avenue of bringing in the idea of giving them permission to talk about the issues whatsoever, no matter how big of a taboo it is. Okay, Scott Moe, he did not have your back on the COVID stuff, and I mean, he didn't even. There's never even been an acknowledgement of any sort of uh, of the white working class as it's never even named, right? They don't even bring that up in naming as an issue to deal with. So yeah, I think if you can point those things out, that will do a lot to give people the permission to stand out and advocate for their people.
They're going to have to get used to being called racist and not do a Joe Rogan and apologize and not go shake hands with a black man the very first time anyone accuses you of having met with the cousin of a second nephew's Nazi, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so eloquent. You know what? I'll say on a personal note, it's hard being Joe Rogan and Jamie at the same time. I sometimes lose my train of thought when I'm trying to like monitor the audio and stuff like this. But again, thanks for bearing with us. Welcome to Country Checkup. This is where we just talk to a random dissident from across the country. This week we got Mac. You can find him on Twitter at Big Mac Saw. All right, Mac. What do you think? What do you think of this news we just heard about the Ottawa going into a state of emergency?
Well, it's the managerial state trying to reinsert itself. I anticipate some spicy stuff coming our way. Let's put it that way. As far as the use of force, some cops might do it. I can see some cops might not do it. You said the military told them to fuck off, no?
Just rumors. I haven't seen anything official.
Yeah. That state of emergency, though, that changes everything. Obviously the big white pill with all of this is that the simmering working class resentment that I've been seeing my entire life has finally roared up and showed its teeth, so to speak. So even if they do get pushed away, like a new precedent has been set, you know?
Yeah, with any luck.
Yeah.
I'm hoping everyone stays safe out there and good, but if the truckers want to, go hog, they'll still have my support, whatever they do.
What was that clip of the old man at the gas station? I mean, some people are ready to rock down there, so we'll see.
Absolutely. I gave our friends Blood Satellite there a little grief last week because I thought they were overreacting on their show. They're saying that they're going to try and run like a Jan 6th type thing on the truckers, and I said, nah, public opinion's different here. We're not the states, etc. This week, it seems like maybe I was proven wrong. Do you think they're going to try and pillory these guys over time?
Yeah, I do. I don't see public opinion may be different up here, but I don't see like the regime in Washington much different as the regime in Ottawa. Quite frankly, it's the same organism to me. They'll approach the problem the same ways.
Yeah, what I see on this is I'm not sure they'll go as hard. I don't think our elites or these politicians really they don't have the same level of aggression. They don't have the same level of balls on all of this. So I'm not sure that they'll go as far as they did at January 6th. Yeah, like I think if they were gonna do something about this, their time was days ago, maybe even a week ago. But at this stage, I don't know. I think anything they do now is just going to put more fuel into the fire. And the issue I think they're running into is they're feeding the exact kind of narratives that the boomer conservative type has built up in their head, this sort of liberal approach of we need our freedoms and we need our liberties. And there's this authoritarian, they even call it a fascist state usually, which not really good narrative, not really an accurate assessment of the issue. But now all of that is being fueled. Like there's this tweet from Randy Hillier. He says the corrupt elites in Ottawa, they despise free people because the free people, we refuse to submit to their edicts. They want to use the power of the state to destroy those who defy their will. We are not intimidated by their smug arrogance. And what this really is, I mean, the elites don't have this sort of, they don't despise free people. This is all like liberal enlightenment
Yeah.
talking points. This is exactly how like Thomas Paine in his Rights of Man was describing the French Revolution, but that's not what it was really about. It wasn't people, fighting for these abstract values of liberty and freedom. What we're seeing now, again, is people feel threatened by all of this, and they just use the language given to them by these Enlightenment narratives. But all of these actions from the government is feeding those same narratives and like I said, giving more fuel to the fire. So I think these politicians are doing a terrible job of managing the whole thing, and I think they just keep digging themselves a deeper hole that they're going to struggle to pull themselves out of in their narratives.
You have a rejoinder to that, Mac, or in agreement?
I'm in agreement. Yeah.
Hard to say what'll happen. I think you're absolutely correct. But this new, the Conservatives Party's shifting, which we'll talk about a little later, and I wonder if that'll offer a bit of a relief valve to the whole thing.
Yeah, we definitely can talk about that and see where all that goes, because there are some, I think, important implications here, but definitely the narratives around this sort of like this revolutionary nature of all of this, I don't think that's accurate from what we're seeing so far.
No, I agree with that. I don't think we're going to have, the revolutionary stuff is the entire framing of this by frankly classical liberals. It's very tedious.
Oh yeah.
That's my problem with Poilievre. He's just co-opting populist rhetoric when at the core, we know who he is. He's been in there for a long time. He's a classical liberal.
True enough. I would not underestimate the symbolism of the caucus and the voters putting a guy like that in, though. That itself is significant.
Well, did we want to get into that right now? Or did we want to hold
what? Well, Mac's got good thoughts on this too. Let me play a clip on it, and and then we might as well jump into it because it's what's on everyone's minds.
And bossy. They're spending more than at any time since World War II, so they control more of what you earn, and you control less. They caused inflation by borrowing and printing $500 billion, which has ballooned the assets of the billionaires, the debts of our children, and the cost of living of the working class. Over half of families now say they struggle just to feed themselves. And more 30-year-olds live in their parents' basements because they can't afford the now typical cost of a home, $800,000. Meanwhile, a small financial elite with access to all that printed money buy up real estate and rent out to a growing class of permanent tenants, people who may never be able to afford a home. And when people speak up, the powerful clamp down. They silence and slander anyone who dares dissent, including with laws censoring what you see and say online. Using COVID as a political opportunity, the Trudeau government has attacked small businesses, truckers, and other hardworking Canadians. They target law-abiding hunters and farmers while letting gangsters and gun smugglers run free. See, here's the problem. Trudeau thinks he's your boss. He's got it backwards. You are the boss. That's why I'm running for Prime Minister, to put you back in charge of your life. Together, we will make Canadians the freest people on earth, with freedom to build a business without red tape or heavy tax.
All right, well, that gives enough of the idea. He's hitting all our talking points. He's talking with 30-year-olds not being able to afford housing, living in their mom's basements. He's addressed the incel question already, a brave step. He's talking about soaring cost of living. Not in this clip, but he's talked about defund the CBC and stuff, which I don't think is our stance exactly, but he's making all those noises, that's for sure. Did I lose you guys?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm still good. What are your thoughts, Mac?
Well, I just see a lot of what happened with Trump. I mean, we're being sold something, and I'm extremely skeptical of the check being cashed. You know, I mean, we've seen this before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so that's exactly where I'm at on all this. And honestly, I don't think he really is giving very much in the way of any valuable talking points.
Yeah.
I mean, great that he's acknowledging the housing crisis and the issues with affordability of living and these things and how easy it is to raise a family. There's stuff in there, but what is he actually proposing we do about it?
Right.
Like he's proposing nothing. He's saying we need a smaller government. He's saying the problem is the government's too big and spending too much.
Yeah,
and we need to shrink it. And good that he makes a little call out to say like a small group of financial elites. He said something along those lines, right? But it's not like he's actually making a dog whistle, because this guy is an ardent Zionist. People are saying, oh, he might be good for free speech, but on that issue, he's saying we have to condemn anti-Semitism. He's all against that. Like there's leftists at university, I think it's York University, where we're complaining about Zionism being racist, and then he's saying we have to address this. We have to shut down that anti-Semitism. So he's not actually pro-free speech, not where it's meaningful. And what is he going to do about this small group of financial elites? Well, he's going to do nothing, because he wants a smaller government. So how does shrinking government power deal with all of those issues that he brings up? He's saying give more power to citizens, let them be responsible for themselves. People, obviously that's been failing. That whole individualistic approach has been failing for people. That is part of the issue.
Yep.
And when you're seeding those narratives back to your base, you're telling them to take the losing side again. So even if he's acknowledging some of the problems, which you can argue, okay, yeah, it's a step in the right direction, he's still funneling people back into the same losing positions that we're trying to break away from. And here's the thing, people like him apparently because he sounds responsible and professional, and well, at least he's better than O'Toole, or he looks better than Trudeau. Well, that's
not good enough.
Exactly. And that's not what we want. Like, I'd rather it be a failing conservative party that gets people blackpilled and disillusioned. But now people are going to be plan trusting on this guy.
Yes.
And he's barely even offering anything.
It is just a relief valve.
Bad narratives to us, especially to the base that needs to be taken off. So I'm not impressed at all. Again, Zionist, nerd guy. Like,
the rare Albertan nerd.
He let his children take his wife's last name. Like, this guy's just a
hell?
loser.
Oh man. The rarest phenotype, the Albertan nerd.
Yeah, well, he's like the spurgy libertarian guy. This is not what we need. Not even close.
Like, I remember when I was first getting into these kind of politics, very, very loosely, maybe 2015, 2016, very naive still, a little bit of Jordan Peterson. And this guy was popping up. I don't know when the first time you guys heard about Pierre, but you get these clips of like him, looking so professional and owning the libs, owning the liberal government, because he was just so much better with his finance. And this is a good guy to have as prime minister. And that's 6 years ago now. They were pushing for him. So now it's finally coming around. I just don't think this is useful. I don't think this is a necessary stage in the progression of Canadian politics. We should just skip that whole loose right populism. We should just go right to people disillusioned. So I'm not a fan of any of that.
No, he's a boomercon's wet dream.
Okay, then let's move it on to the question of how do we deal with if the Conservatives do end up shifting, instead of like from an O'Toole to a guy who's ostensibly more right wing. How do we shift our strategy in order to get our best outcomes?
Talk to the people around you. Get our perspective out. That's what I've been doing for the last year and a half. Just, maintain good optics. Don't be a moron. Don't be a spurg. But just talk to the people around you. Plant those seeds. That's been my policy going forward. I mean, there is no viable political body in my era to get these perspectives out at all. The people who try to infiltrate the Conservative Party, they get boxed out. Tons of people I know have tried to do that. So that's been my thing. Just talk to people, grassroots. Joey on Twitter advocates for the same thing, though he's more of a democratic-minded person than I am.
Yeah, I got boxed out of the PPC when I was involved in that background.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people. Yeah.
I remember there's these guys called the Sons of Odin, who are these goofy guys. Like they dress like Mad Max bikers. They had like Asian guys in it, and they were. But they showed up at a protest, and my regional handler guy for the EDA just took off pretty much running. He's like, "Oh, I can't be photographed with these guys." Yeah, it was pathetic.
Yeah, and in terms of how to use this, I would echo what Mac was saying. I think, and what you can do in these discussions is, again, points out what is he actually offering as a solution,
Right.
and just point out that he's a loser.
Yeah.
Like fundamentally, he doesn't really offer anything of value in terms of solving the problems. You can say, hey, he's getting the right issues. He is pointing out some of these problems that we are facing, but what is he going to do about any of those issues? And point out, like, the losing side is saying we need less government, we need less control. It doesn't even mean we needed some overreach, like totalitarian approach, right? That's what that's what these conservative types automatically assume, is that that's where government leads you every time. But you need to point out that collective action for your own people is the correct route to deal with those problems, not what this guy's offering. And then also just call him a nerd, and just point out that he's weak and he's uninspiring. Like, give us fire and brimstone. Give us a real leader.
Yeah.
Not this fucking nerd.
I'll say that was the problem with Sloan too. That was my problem with Sloan. There's not enough muscle and fire there, for me at least. The things he said were nice, but he just didn't have the punch. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that covers it on that topic. And I think, Mac, we'll say goodbye to you for now.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Yeah.
It was great talking to you, man.
Take care out there.
We're taking a look at this article from Owen, and he's talking about the subject and what it means to be a subject in terms of the perceiving person. And in this article, he challenges the modern notion of free will and the subject as an individual engaging with the world, who this liberal notion of just freely making the best choice for himself as he goes, but not really being tied down to any identity or tradition, just kind of picking up whatever he feels is best for himself. And he makes the point that this unmoors us from a sense of identity, and I think a lot of what he's saying here is very true. Is very prescient. With all we're seeing, like all of us today are seeking something real to be a part of, because we have this modern notion of this individualistic approach to the world, as opposed to being a part of a totality, in Owen's words. So he comes up with some interesting things to ponder, and I think there's a lot of implications that we can dive into there. I don't know if you wanted to lead off with anything that stuck out to you, NP.
My first thought on this article was just the practicality of it. He almost guides you into a frame of mind where you can start to conceptualize, almost like Evola does, a new way of being. This free of this what I call liberal detachment. I don't think that's probably the correct term or anything like that, but it works. The distance we have from reality. It harkens back to Josh's article from last week, but I really that's the problem of modernity. I mean, our experience of it, at least, right? And I'm always happy to read anything that offers a prescription against despair. So I'm looking forward to talking to him, and I think it'll be good.
Yeah, it will be good, because he brings out all these different challenges against the liberal conception of the world. So, like you said, he talks about the idea of being able to radically transform your perception of the world, and this is in contrast to the notion that you just sort of add layers of complexity, like he calls it, like the Russian nesting dolls. Like, as you build your identity, you somehow just add layers. And this is actually what they teach, at least in my experience in the university, kind of from Foucault, I believe, of this notion that your identity is like an onion that you just have all these layers, but you can peel back and then there's nothing underneath.
It goes entirely against the Jungian conception of enantiodrama, where your personality and identity can flip to its polar opposite in a blink of an eye.
Exactly. So with what Owen's bringing to the table here, he's saying, no, it's not just those layers like an onion or like Russian nesting dolls that you're just free to choose and add those levels on. No, you do have an inherent being to you that is tied to a tradition. And not only are you tied to this tradition, but you don't simply add on pieces and layers as you go, because when you have these radical transformations, your entire perception changes on the spot. So you don't necessarily keep carrying those previous layers. A lot of us, you could even use the example of some of us that have come into this sphere of thinking. You drop a lot of your earlier notions that you grew up with, some of those ingrained narratives that public education or the media gave to you. You completely reject all those ideas. It's not like you've built on top of them. You have a new paradigm of living. And so this liberal notion of these layers is completely false, right? Like I use the example of liberals tending to view primitive man as just modern man in a loincloth, but that's not the case. They live through the world in an entirely different way. So what he's prescribing here, or what he's leading us towards, is this better understanding of participating in a tradition and being that tradition, as opposed to just being some detached, despairing liberal. And that's why I think we need to do a better job of approaching this style of thinking. Because where I see the relevance, for example, we have Canada as a post-nation state, right? That's sort of the narrative we're given by our leaders, by Trudeau, for example, calling it that. They've always pushed this idea of Canada is a place for anyone. Anyone can be Canadian. There's a Canadian born in the world anywhere. They just are waiting to find their place here. And this is tying back to that modern notion of subjectivity, where you can just adopt any identity that you want. Someone can just choose to participate in the ideas of your identity, the civic nationalism of just, I'll be a person in this country because I adopt those ideas. Even in this, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I am Japanese today. I identify as Japanese today, just so you know. So please be respectful as such.
Exactly. Apparently, that's what that leads us to. And I mean, it's not even at this point for Canada in particular. You don't even have to adopt the ideas of Canada. They don't even accept that there is some ideal and ideals to adhere to as a Canadian. You just simply step in across the border and you are a Canadian. It means anything, so it means nothing. The Canadian identity is a void, and it is directly because of this modern notion of subjectivity that Owen is critiquing that has led us to being this sort of void of a country and void of a people. So when it comes to coming back into a tradition, it's not as simple as just taking the conservative approach and seeing tradition as sort of this artifact to uphold.
Well said. Well, should we call him up?
I think, we should jump on the call with Owen and get some more insight into what he is talking about there.
Okay, get ready to experience some of my amazing video editing effects. I'm sure they'll be incredible.
Hell yeah, brother. Really like what you're putting out there, Owen, and the whole Firstness and the Imperium Press project. All that stuff is real great. So how about you just start off telling us a bit about yourself, name, when you started writing this kind of material.
All right. Yeah. My name's Owen, and I lived in Canada my whole life. I got into this sort of material round about my mid-20s initially, like as a young adult, as a teenager. I wasn't particularly political, at least in a conscious way. And obviously, most teenagers, at least like millennial teenagers, like I'm in my early 30s, and when I was young, most people were either like Marxists or libertarians or some sort of anarchists, just like very vague, kind of romanticized like views of politics, like usually something grandiose and revolutionary. And I was never particularly interested in that, at least not consciously. I mean, like, I thought of myself as apolitical. In retrospect, being apolitical is still kind of like a political orientation towards the world, but like, you don't necessarily recognize it as such. So when I was a young adult, I was mostly interested in philosophers and thinkers like Nietzsche and Thoreau, and his book Walden, and these figures who were very individualistic in a certain sense and really promoted the idea of just kind of like forging your own path through life and like kind of disregarding the inherited structures that you find yourself in and kind of just going on your own like imminent quest to find like self-understanding. At least that's how I interpreted it when I was like 18, 19. So for several years, I wasn't particularly deep into literature or political theory or philosophy or anything like that. I was kind of just out experiencing life and learning from that. But inevitably, as I was going through my 20s, which in the 2010s, like I began to notice more and more, especially once I moved to a large city, just how much there seemed to be like a general cultural malaise, like not from any particular group, but just in general, like in the mainstream, in all the various subcultures I came across, in like the internet political movements of the time, like the like early woke movement of the like around the early 2010s, and a lot of the early like red pill culture, which was like promoting this message of just kind of, abandoning your family, abandoning your country, just moving to another part of the world, making a lot of money, and just sleeping with lots of random women, et cetera, like a very nihilistic kind of worldview. And like as I began to notice these things more and more, I was like, well, something's going on here. Like something seems wrong with like society, but in a way I couldn't quite articulate. So I decided to start reading more philosophy and political theory. And at first I wasn't like, I wasn't drawn down any particular path. Like I was reading Karl Marx, I was reading all the postmodernists, I was like reading the classics of like the Western canon of philosophy. And slowly certain things began to draw me in. Like one of the first thinkers that I was really excited about was Oswald Spengler, who, for those of you who follow these sorts of scenes, was quite popular a few years ago with his main work, The Decline of the West, which basically puts forward this idea of culture as like a superorganism, which individuals comprise parts of, like cultures as like a living thing really that like has a birth and a life cycle and ultimately decays. And when I first encountered this idea, it was very radical to me because obviously growing up, in the West in the 20th century, you're kind of immersed in liberalism so much so that you don't even really notice it. It's just your default kind of unconscious like perception of the world is this idea of being kind of like a deracinated, formless, ghost haunting reality that's just kind of like experiencing a particular life but isn't really beholden to it in any way. And reading Spengler for the first time really introduced me to like another way of conceptualizing this idea that the individual could be part of something greater, like a greater social organism or a historical tradition that passes through the individual but isn't limited to the individual. So as I was reading that, obviously, like, because we live in the age of the internet, I was like looking online for like-minded individuals and people who were exploring these ideas, and I found a few YouTube channels, like YouTubers. I think the first one I found was a YouTuber named True Dill Tom, who I don't think that channel exists any longer, but through his channel I found others. I found Tyler Hamilton's Euro Bureau of Literature podcast, and I found
Classic.
Yeah, I learned about so many books through that, and a lot of the figures that were regulars on there, like Joel Davis and Keith Woods. They had channels of their own where they would be doing like, discussions of books, and like I spent a good year or so just following these channels and absorbing all this literature until I felt like I was somewhat fluent in it, in the ideas, and felt ready to participate, because all of these guys have their own communities online on like Discord servers where they're not just reading these books, they're not just like interested in like accumulating, like a storehouse of knowledge. They actually want to do new philosophical work, new theoretical development, to try to build kind of an understanding outside of the more institutional framework of like mainstream academia. So around about the end of 2020, I joined in with these communities. At that time, Joel was working on launching the Firstness Journal. It had been something that he'd been planning for quite some time, and he approached me about writing for it, asked if there was anything I was interested in doing. I didn't really have much experience in writing in this realm. Like, I've certainly written in a more personal sense, like a more kind of journalistic, intuitive way of writing. I didn't have much experience with like more formal theoretical writing, so I decided to take a crack at it. And obviously it is like a learning process, because when you're writing philosophy, you need to be much more rigorous with your use of language. You need to be very careful about how you articulate certain ideas, because the way I see it, the whole point of philosophy is that you are trying to approach like a very abstract and complex and particular vector of human understanding. And in order to do that, you need to move very carefully, and you need to like carefully weigh every aspect of your use of language. I guess this sort of... Oh, yes.
No, I was going to ask you. I was trying to explain your essay to some family, and it seems like just such a simple, beautiful concept. This distance and despair we have from losing our traditional modes of being and stuff like this. But I lacked vocabulary entirely, and I almost lacked like the mentality to be able to explain something so simple. And I was just wondering what sort of like mental training or mental state you have to get in to be able to write like that.
Well, it's difficult, because I was always, like I said, I didn't read a great deal of philosophy until like a couple of years ago, but I always, even as a child, just had an interest in trying to understand being, like, not even motivated by my more like mature like desire to find out like what's wrong with contemporary society. It was just interesting to me, just like to look at reality, and to start with these very basic fundamental questions that you find time and time again in philosophy, like, okay, what's the nature of time, and what's the nature of space, and like what does it mean that there's a before and an after? What does it mean to be an individual who's experiencing life? And like these sorts of questions are very open-ended, and no matter how long you think about them, even though they're the most like immediate and kind of like obvious fundamental mysteries of life, which every person is faced with, it doesn't feel like something that you can very easily map out. So that process of trying to map it out involves a lot of very careful self-reflection. And I mean, obviously, when you start reading philosophy, you begin to realize that there's a very long tradition of great minds trying to do just that, and that there have been various formal systems built up over centuries or millennia in some cases, to try to carefully conceptualize certain very complex themes. And these can be very useful, but at the same time, and I think this is something I was trying to address in this paper, these conceptual frameworks that you create, useful as they are, they can also kind of box you in. They can kind of limit you to a particular way of viewing something which is ultimately beyond any particular framework.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's, in those rigid systems, there can be diminishing returns on what you can get out of them, especially when faced with actually having to live in the world as it is present to you. So I think having an aspect where you can approach the world as it is, and have an understanding of how to just go back to that intuitive sense, as opposed to this notion of sort of making the subject an identity that you can just choose for yourself and put all these complex layers on top of it. I think finding a way to rediscover that intuitive approach, and that kind of seems what you seem to be getting at here. So I guess my question is, how do we do a better job of cultivating that more intuitive approach so people don't get too caught up in this kind of choose your own identity, choose your own subjectivity? How do we shift people from that back to that intuitive approach?
Yeah, I do find, and I think this is something that I like think about a lot, especially the last year or so. Like what I was approaching in the paper was this idea that I find like a lot of the modern kind of worldview, this idea of like the self as this formless kind of, you know, abstraction that isn't tied to any sort of particular inherent being, that kind of induces this neurotic orientation towards the world, whereas there's this feeling that you need to discover meaning, that you need to kind of become the master of life. And I think this is what drives a lot of the desire to like understand everything and to systematize everything and to develop this perfect kind of rational framework that contains the whole universe. And this is obviously not just like at the individual level. You see this at the cultural level, a lot of the drive of like modern science. And I'm not one of these people that's against science by any means, but you can certainly see a neurotic desire to kind of master the very laws of like physics and biology and to be able to manifest anything that the imagination desires. So there's this desire to want to control everything, to systematize everything. And I think this is ultimately impossible. And this is something I've said before, that in this attempt to systematize being, you're never quite able to contain everything. Like even the process of trying to create a system is adding like something novel to the world. The very process of you trying to look at the world and understand it is creating novelty, because you yourself and your thoughts are part of the world. So there's always this layer that's beyond your grasp. So it's like an impossible task to try to contain it all. And I think the solution to this, perhaps, is to take a radically different view to life rather than trying to contain it and systematize it, to recognize yourself as something within a greater totality. And I think this is the mentality that, you know, perhaps was more prevalent in the past, where individuals saw themselves within a world created by like God or gods, or they saw themselves as part of a tradition, as part of a people, as part of a nation, which was something more than their own individuality, and they kind of put their subjecthood into that. But in a more modern sense, in a more like mundane sense, let's say, like, this could be something as simple as adopting what I think of as like a more strategic relation to life, perhaps, or a more like game mentality towards life rather than an attempt to systematize it. So you're not so much trying to just like reduce everything down to fixed systems. Rather, you're trying to cultivate within yourself the ability to look towards every moment, which is ultimately something you won't be able to predict, to look towards, you know, the novelty of life coming into you and to try to be present with it and to do something with it. You can still be goal oriented. You can still, you know, have the desire to manifest something particular. I'm not suggesting you just, you know, let go of any sort of like attempt to do anything, but rather you, sorry, I just lost my train of thought completely.
No, not at all. It's it reminds me of the William Blake quote about the bounded being loathed by its possessor. The same dull round even of a universe would soon become a mill with complicated wheels. You
know, I've had the complete works of William Blake on my bookshelf for about 3 years now, and I still haven't gotten around to reading it. I really should one of these days.
Some of it's easier than others, I find. You might want to start with Marriage in Heaven and Hell and not like Jerusalem or something like that. Good to know. It tormented me for years too, but I do like it. Is there any other like more older mainstream literary influences like that you'd have?
like within the realm of philosophy or just literature in general?
Both, or wherever they overlap.
All right. Well, like I mentioned earlier, my earliest like introduction to philosophy was Nietzsche, who obviously is, as far as philosophers go, like quite the literary figure. Like many philosophers aren't particularly gifted writers, or they're writing very technically. And Nietzsche has this ability to write extremely poetically and to still convey like very like particular and like abstract ideas. And I think that had a huge influence on me when I was like 18, 19. I read a little bit early on, like, the classics, the Greeks, like Plato and things like that. Nothing quite struck me in the same way. For several years, I was interested primarily in like more kind of like romantic figures. As I mentioned, Thoreau's Walden was a big influence on me. The idea of just kind of leaving society behind and returning to nature, and just like building your own life, like disconnected from society. I remember reading like Jack Kerouac. He was probably the only one of the Beats generation that really stood out to me. I found with a lot of like the Beat poets that I read, they had this for lack of a better term, kind of like degenerate relationship with life, where they just seemed like, rebellious for the sake of rebellion.
I got that out of Kerouac too, though, personally.
Well, that's true. I mean, I was going to say, like, he certainly has that just as much, but what I think appealed to me about his writing was that there was a certain awareness of this, particularly in his, like, later, not quite as famous novel compared to On the Road, his The Dharma Bums. There's this awareness of himself as kind of this aging hipster who hasn't really made anything of his life, and he's kind of realizing that like the youthful romanticism that kind of propelled him for most of his early years is kind of starting to fade, and there isn't really like a light on the horizon. I think that, although I didn't consciously realize it at the time, really like started to shift some things in my mind, because I was reading that, I was kind of in that same mentality of just like, go out, live life, don't worry too much about it. Life's an adventure. And Kerouac really had this way of kind of implicitly
You're cracking up here, Owen.
revealing, I don't even know if it was
there you go.
I'd like to think it was.
Sorry, Owen. We were losing our connection for the last 5 seconds there. I think you're sounding better now. Yes.
Hey, sound good.
Okay. Yeah, as I was saying. All right. Yeah, Kerouac's The Dharma Bums was a really influential book to me because it revealed like the kind of implicit despairs of that more romantic, adventurous kind of hipster lifestyle. From there, I started to get more into like proper philosophy. Like Gilles Deleuze was obviously a huge influence. Like a lot of the French writers of the later 20th century, I thought did very interesting things. Spengler, Kant, like just all sorts of names. I'm looking over at my bookshelf right now, actually, because I'm completely blanking on the ones. I'm sure as soon as this call's done, I'll remember so many different people that. But yeah, I've read like maybe since COVID started a good 200 plus books, so they've kind of all like blurred together at this point, honestly.
Impressive. You're almost up to PewDiePie's numbers.
Wow, going for those PewDiePie numbers.
Well, that's excellent, Owen. Charles, do you have any more questions?
You know what? I think we covered it all here. Really, everything that I wanted to get out of Owen. He has given us quite an intelligent take on the subject and how to approach living in a better way than what our modern rationalistic approaches seem to give us. I guess maybe the only other thing I was wondering that if you wanted to touch on just briefly is you talk about tradition and approaches to tradition, and the difference between sort of wearing a tradition as like a coat or as a different style to wear, or holding it as like an artifact to look at versus actually just being the tradition, like yourself. You are the tradition. So I was wondering if, yeah, you could give us kind of what the difference between those two things looks like.
Yeah, and this is something I initially came to. I wrote a paper for the previous issue of Firstness back in like last summer, where I was exploring this idea of like part of the modern problem of like, globalist mass democratic culture is that everyone conceptualizes themselves as this kind of formless individual that can do anything but doesn't have any sort of particular identity that they're beholden to, who kind of approaches every identity through the capitalist marketplace as like a commodity that can be purchased. And this applies to any sort of lifestyle, like if you want to be recognized as something, you got to go out and buy like the proper clothing, you got to go to the proper venues, you got to behave, you got to adopt certain cultural tropes, you got to act out a certain persona. And it's like all very performative. And I think you even see this with a lot of like political identities, and this includes the so-called trad movement, which you see over the last decade online, which has become extremely popular. It's like borderline mainstream popularity at this point. But I do think a lot of it, unfortunately, is quite performative. It is like it doesn't really embody any genuine tradition. It's like, it's like an aesthetic preference. It's like a lot of people who are into the trad movement, I think, they like the idea of being seen in a particular way, or they like looking at pictures of like pastoral communities from like the 1800s. They like kind of, old clothing styles. They like movies that present like a different era, but they kind of miss the point, in my opinion, of like even being interested in tradition, because like the whole idea of being any sort of traditionalist, whether it's like, these religious traditionalists or some sort of ethno-nationalist or some sort of, like someone who's into Julius Evola who wants to adopt kind of a radically distinct like orientation towards the world. Like the implicit idea in all of this is that there's like some fundamentally different way that a person can orient towards the world, like a fundamentally, as I was saying earlier, like the way Spengler describes, where you can conceive of yourself not as this formless individual who's kind of disconnected from everything and kind of like just chooses to engage with things. You could, for instance, view yourself as an aspect of something greater, like view yourself as an aspect of a people or of a religion that's a living thing, not just like an abstract institution, or, as any other sort of like progression of a living tradition. And I think like a lot of, the traditionalist movement fails to do this because it still fundamentally treats tradition just as something that the individual approaches and chooses to act out and, is free to discard at any moment. And like I think what I was ultimately getting at with this piece is that if there actually is anything to these traditions, if they aren't simply just like another commodity that people can purchase, then that suggests there's like a living essence in them. And it's not that you choose to adopt them, it's that you recognize that it actually flows through you and that it has your whole life. Like if this tradition actually does represent you, if you are a part of this tradition, then that means that all of your life so far is like the living manifestation of the tradition. The tradition isn't something that existed in the past that we need to get back to. It's something that moves from the past through the present into the future. It's transforming, it's changing. And I think this is difficult for a lot of people to do. It's because like in order to do that, you need to, in a sense, embrace the imperfections of yourself and the present moment, and to recognize that as this thing that you've idealized. Like if you simply view the tradition as something, like a 10th century Viking village or something, make it this like completely abstracted fantasy, totally disconnected from the modern world, it's always just kind of like this like, fetishized, safe thing that you're contemplating. It almost becomes like a form of pornography. It's like, just this like fiction that you're kind of viewing that has no real connection to your actual lived experience. And I mean, that's like, it's a dopamine hit, but it doesn't get you anywhere. I think like in order to actually do something real with it, you need to recognize that, you know, it might have started out as this like kind of idealized past that you're viewing, but that past has developed into the present. And if there is any sort of essence to it, it does exist in this present moment. It exists in you. So, I mean, that's like kind of the abstract terrain that I'm exploring. In terms of like what that means in terms of praxis, I'm not entirely sure. Like that's what I'm currently trying to figure out myself.
And you do have some upcoming articles as well. You're not done here.
Yeah. I'm in the early stages of writing another piece. I think the next one I would like to do is going to be a little more technical, a little more focused on like the actual bureaucratic structures of modern government, whereas the previous piece from the last issue of Firstness was more of a intuitive kind of like personal exploration. I kind of like to bounce back and forth in my writing, like write something that focuses more on like subjective experience and my own kind of emotional relation to the world, and then zoom out and try to do like a more like theoretically rigorous kind of examination of like macro level historical forces and, you know, sociological structures and things like that.
We look forward to those, and we'll be reading them, and we'll be having you back hopefully once they do come out.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
This was Owen Gilbride, and his article in Firstness was called Problematic Subjects, and it's in issue 3. We'll link it below. Make sure you read it and check it out, because you can't do it justice just talking about it here. It's something you really got to directly experience, which is ironically the topic of the essay, kind of. So you should definitely read it.
Yep, absolutely. Is there anywhere that people can go reach you, Owen?
Yeah, probably the easiest way for people listening to this would be on Twitter. You can find me. My Twitter handle is @world3tk. So yeah, that would be the best way to reach out to me. If you want to shoot me a message on there, we can go from there.
Awesome. Yeah. So go check out his writing on Firstness. Go check out some of the videos that he's done with Joel Davis. I think those are up on Joel Davis's channel. And he has some pretty cool music too. You should definitely check out his selection of music. It's some interesting stuff as well. So yeah, thanks for coming on, Owen. Appreciate
no
your
problem.
time.
All right,
Thank you
take
very
care.
much.
That was a great interview. I really enjoyed talking to Owen both times.
Yeah, Owen, guy is an absolute beauty, just a gem.
Real
solid dude. Glad we got Leafs like him on our side. He's a very, very well-spoken guy.
And he was such a good sport about me screwing up.
Hey man, it's no big deal.
Oh, well.
Everyone makes mistakes. So.
Well, I think that will probably do her for today. We got maple syrup to drink and hockey to play and all that.
All day, every day.
All right. Well, I'll see you next Sunday. And
before we head out, anywhere that people can reach you at.
Yeah, you can reach me on Twitter at neither P nor P, or on Telegram at neither pleasure nor pain, or follow any of the many links in the description below just to our channel stuff. A lot of it's in development, but you'll find us eventually. And
yeah, you will.
Shout out to our SoundCloud listeners, both of you. You're missing some good visuals and stuff, but I respect that you might want to be, lifting plates or doing dishes while you listen.
Yeah, might be driving somewhere. Yeah.
You can watch TV while you drive. That's what phones are for. It's Faustian.
I won't deny that, I guess.
Okay. I disavow, actually. But anyway, have a good evening. I'll see you soon. Take care out there.
See you, boys.